Oh, lag. Got it. All right. So trying a new streaming, so hopefully this works. Everything looks good. So again, hey guys, this is Anthony with Awesome Historical Weapons Guild here with Andreas, now with his own fancy mic, so he can say hi if he really wants
I'm a
to.
real boy.
Tonight we're digging more into our Jude Lew, Das Spec book. Tonight it looks like we're starting with the Krumpau. We're starting on page 117. So I'm just jumping right into things. So from the Zettel, crump upwards nimbly, throw the point on the hands. He who displaces well with crump will wound many strikes with steps. And this is a lot more reading, so I apologize. Hopefully I can break this up. So know that the Krumpau is one of the four displacing against the four guards because you oppose both Ox and Aber with it, as well as the Unterhau. Do it as follows. When you come at him with the Zufektin and he stands against you with the sword before his head and the guard Ox on his left side, so Ox on your left side, then put your left foot forward and hold your sword at the right shoulder in the guard. Jump from this guard with your right leg well to the right side and strike him with the long edge out of crossed arms over his hands. So this is kind of your entry level, kind of beginning hand strike. So he is up in his left ox. I'm in my guard from the shoulder. Working from here, I'm kind of springing well to my right side, crossing my arms, striking at the hands. So there's lots of options, variations to this I kind of want to take some time and dig into and talk about. So one of the first and most important things is that as we practice, as we do this in HEMA, that people generally have really good hand protection or none at all. So make sure you're working at a speed safe for your partner, safe for you're working with. But because we have that protection, we're kind of used to it. Lots of times you'll get a much smaller reaction in drills when you're working with like the big lobster claw gloves. So right, so if he pretends he has gloves on and I throw this cut towards his hands, he may do a very minute, like barely adequate adjustment, and this might slip into his hands. This happens for real, and it's even to slide down his blade into his hands. I'm not going to say I'm going to cut his fingers off or break anything, but he's going to be in pain, and there's a decent chance he might actually drop his weapon, right? Everyone's been hit in the hands enough that you kind of immediately, instinctive, without even thinking, pull your hand back, open it up, pull it away. So if I do that with a sharp, like yes, he might have a small slice, but he's going to flinch or react in a way that he wouldn't with trainer equipment. But also that in mind, if we are training like they're sharps, if this is a sharp, his action would be much larger, right? Well, don't run away.
I would.
He would go really wide with this action, right? And that kind of action reaction is really important as we start trying to start understanding what we're doing, how this is working. So he's an ox, just keeping things simple for now. That crossing my arm, spring to my right side, and kind of working from here. So as I'm going to spring, I'm coming off, and I'm coming wide to the right. One of the things that I like to do with this is really emphasize that this is still coming towards his face, towards his head. I'm really driving down and across with this. I'm not trying to like just skip aside. I'm not coming left to right, just crossing those hands and going away. I'm really still driving from my right to my left. I'm still really driving this towards my opponent, towards his face, and really making him feel intimidated and threatened by my actions, right? I'm coming here, I'm coming this, like that. So as far as my safety and why I'm able to get away with this, and correct me if I'm wrong, right? As he, even if he tries to track me with this motion, right, I'm really coming down on this blade. I have his flat. I can start displacing, working other options in, making other controlling motions, things of that nature. As always, when we're talking about guard breaks, really important to keep in mind that a guard break is not a I win button. It's not as a ha, he went into left ox. I can easily destroy him and kill him in one shot. A guard break is about getting him out of position and giving myself a good advantage in the bind, right? So if he's an ox, I spring to my right, I come through. As he goes to cover himself, I'm able to cut through on the weapon. And maybe they get stuck here. Maybe his guard structure is solid and amazing, but even from here, right, I can start, go back to the Mutierans, controlling from there. Or we can go back to a Duplieren even, right, where I just need to, right, step through, cross that out, things like that. So other options do start showing up that we've talked about in the past, and it's really about getting that idea of applying these things as we build up. I really believe that when these fake books were originally written, they are kind of scaffolding techniques up. We're kind of starting with some entry level concepts, then building them up, making more complicated things with keeping the past in mind. These aren't separate, isolated ideas, but this whole system should be kind of looked at and studied together. So continuing with the Krumpau, so we kind of have, again, making sure we match all our things, sword starting at my right shoulder, jumping from this guard with my right leg to the right side, striking him with the long edge out of crossed arms over his hands. So I'm going over the hands, I'm keeping myself high, I'm throwing my sword high, and as I said, really just working on making sure that I'm following those instructions. Next item, do the Krumpau from the Schrankhut from both sides. Take this guard as follows. When you come to the opponent in the Zufechten, put your left foot forward and hold your sword with the point on the ground to your right side, so that the long edge faces upward. Give an opening with your left side, so I'm kind of baiting him into attacking. When he strikes to your opening, when he strikes to your opening from above, jump away with the strike with your right foot to your right side and against him. Push the pommel of your sword with the left hand under your right arm and strike with crossed arms to the long edge with the point onto his hands. So already we see a lot of consistency, right? We're striking with crossed arms, using a long edge. Right now we're targeting only his hands because we don't like him. I'm gonna step. Right, so my Schrankhut, real quick. I'm kind of turning, left foot is forward, my long edge is up. I'm looking to make this kind of quick, easy, cutting, displacing motion. So I'm making this opening, I'm saying, come on, you know you want it. I'm inviting him into attack as he does. I'm springing to my right side. I want my foot toward him, right? So I'm not, it's important to notice I'm not turning my foot away. I'm not going to run into the wall here, but I'm really keeping my foot pointed towards him, which is something I always build up on. My kind of easy anecdote allegory for this is imagine I want to tackle him afterward, right? So we don't have swords. He steps toward me. I'm going to spring aside, and I want to be able to come directly in. So if you can't leap towards your opponent, that's what kind of that your foot is towards him means to me as I come to the side, but I'm still braced, ready to attack my opponent. I'm not going to step laterally and like run past him. I'm still going to run through him at him as I move. So again, the Shankut, he attacks. I step, cross those arms, coming over right to the hands. Again, he attacks, working from here. So Andreas has been being very polite, kind of highlighting these things. I'm going to encourage him, yell at him, and make sure he fences a little bit more truly, right? So a lot of times interpretations and ideas fall apart when your drilling partner is super passive, super polite, and just kind of lets you get away with things, right? If I say, cool, we're going to throw our cuts, normal overhouse, I cut, then I'm going to go through, I'm going to step here, get my false edge down, I'm going to do this thing, and then this thing, and wait, but that should have worked, right? So I need to make sure that my opponent is actually being antagonistic, fighting the actual fight. So when I do that leap, when he throws a cut at me, right?
I need my fingers.
I'm not going to hit you, you're going to hit me, right? So he does nothing, he still throws a normal cut, but as I go away, this cut should track, right? He's not going to cut down to the air where I used to stand. He's not a training dummy. He's going to like, oh, you moved. I can redirect my sword a little bit to make sure I'm going to actually hit you. So making sure we're really working on that and that you're being honest with yourself and your partner as you practice these. So again, he cuts. I come across. There. So now this sword is way more exciting. But notice this leg is no longer even close to being in danger, right? Because no one's going to sit here and cut at your leg when you swing a sword at their hands. But even as he displaces, this cut is still riding down his sword right to his fingers, right? And as I kind of twist this out more, twist this higher, I'm still catching his blade, catching his flat, rolling over, and striking onto the hands. So Again, he's going to cut. I'm going to make my opening. I'm going to step across. And I'm sure this looks kind of equally bad, but I can promise you
Okay.
that I've got his flat. I can very easily push this down. I'm not going to do it by hitting the strong of the sword unless I'm being polite working with a partner. But I'm going to come down right on his thumbs, right on his hands, and make sure he can't hold his sword anymore.
Also, maybe real quick, when he
Yeah.
says cross your arms,
Oh, highlighting
it
that. So,
maybe.
so thank you. So a quick note: crossing your arms, whether from high, whether from low. This idea for me is that it's very similar to that kind of duplieren position we had before, right? So in duplieren, we were kind of in a structured guard here, and I pushed my hands across. So this crossed wrist here that you kind of see, that's how I'm interpreting the crossed arms. So from a cut, when I throw it, I cross my arms. Notice I'm still coming right to left with this cut, but my arms are coming crossed, and it's changing the angle of that cut. So again, from down here, as I spring to my side, I'm in that same crossed position. But I'm still really focusing on, as I'm throwing these cuts, they're coming or from my right to my left, right? I need to make sure they're intersecting the path of his sword. If I kind of throw this cut, coming from left to right with crossed wrists, then we both get hit. And, it's not very exciting. So I need to make sure as I do that, I'm cutting with crossed wrists, right to left. This way I can catch his sword, catch his hands, deflect him down and away, and control everything as I keep myself safe. Some more Krump. All right. So the other side of the shrink hook. Item, do the shrink hook on your left side as follows. When you come to him in the Zufechten, put your right foot forward and hold your sword on your left side with crossed arms, the point facing toward the ground so that your short edge is facing upward. Give an opening of your right side. When he strikes to this opening, step with the left foot out of the strike toward your left side, while simultaneously with your step with the short edge over his hands. So this is basically the mirror image of the one we just went through. So I'm going to start crossed arms this time, point down, short edge up.
I'm coming.
Yeah, you're coming, because
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm baiting to this attack.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to step aside, coming across over here. So the interesting difference on this one, I'm not going to promise, we'll play with this a little bit, but I want to talk about it, is that it doesn't say springing toward anymore. It just says stepping well to the left side. So I don't know if that is um, laziness in writing in the literal, like, I don't want to keep writing these words again, or you don't need to do that or don't want to do that anymore. So we'll kind of play with that, feel that out. So really working from the left side, I give the right shoulder, I step to the side, coming down. So right now I'm kind of stepping away, leaning away, really working on that void. I feel like he accented away from the cut more in this transcription or version of the play for the last one. So I'm really kind of thinking right now about getting that step, that lean away as he cuts across, right? So I'm able to make this cut coming through, coming there. I do feel like this side's kind of stuck behind. So I'm going to try that spring we did from the opposite side. So as he cuts, I'm going to come across there. And I'm noticing that this one's definitely not as comfortable, not only because it's the offside, but his hand target and the hand I'm targeting isn't controlling the sword as much as before. So it's much harder to hit the hand and deflect the blade from this left side. So definitely something to keep in mind as you're working on this, as you're practicing that as I spring, as I move, right? Here I've maybe kind of got it, but this sword is way closer in a position I'm not happy with than it was from the right side. So that one could definitely use some more study, more work. I'm not going to bore you guys by sitting here for 15 more minutes while I try to fight through that. But definitely worth noting, Kroom from the left side, a little bit less intuitive, a little bit less friendly than the dominant side was. So moving on, again from the Zettel. Strike the Kroom to the flat of the masters if you want to weaken them. When it flashes above, stand back. That will I praise. All right, so the gloss. Note, you shall execute this piece against the masters of the binding of the sword. Notice it as follows. When you come to him in the Zufechten, put your sword in the Schrenkhut on your right side, or hold the sword on your right shoulder. When he strikes above to the opening, strike strongly with crossed arms with the long edge Again, right? So Krung Pao, crossed arms, long edge from your right side is against his strike. As soon as the swords flash together, wind indes with the sword against your left side and go up with the arms. Thrust towards his upper openings. Otherwise, if you do not want to thrust, as soon as it flashes, strike him indes with the short edge to his head and to his body. So we're looking for this high crump winding, it looks like, because as soon as flash together, winding indes toward left side, go up with the arm. So we're kind of coming low and bringing the hands up high to make these thrusts to the upper openings. Or if you don't want to thrust, you can just strike with a short edge against the head and body. So a lot to play with, a lot to see what happens here. So as he cuts, I'm crimping from here. If I wind high and kind of make this thrust, immediate reactions are I don't feel overly safe. Like, yes, his sword is somewhat stopped, somewhat slow, but I definitely don't have as much isolation as I would normally like for movement like that. The other thing worth noting is they don't give us any sort of footwork for how to play out this version of Kung Pao. I know a lot of people will look at the first two plays and say like, oh yeah, you spring off to the right side, and that's how you do a krump, or you spring away from their attack, and that's how you do a krump, and we can definitely play with that. I'm a big fan of doing this version of the krump, stepping across to the left, because that's how they tell you to always cut. Just go left with your cuts, wish defense for the strength of your entire body. So I'm a big fan of, as he throws this cut, I want to step into it and bring it down. Now we're nice and close. Now if I want to wind up, right, he is much more like, oh, there's a sharp thing in front of my face. I should be dealing with that. Versus if I'm stepping and leaping away, like, yes, I've kind of got that, but there's not a whole lot of presence and a whole lot of pressure there. And you see as Andreas starts acting more naturally, more like there's an actual fight going on, these secondary actions don't really seem nearly as effective as I give him more distance to work with. So again, as we cut, as I come in, right, that was nice and close to him. And you know what? He's allowed to deflect. He's allowed to be safe. I'm in a great position to keep working, keep attacking. So that's another thing I like to keep in the back of my head, right? These are not set moves of I'm going to win, I'm going to defeat the other person. This is very much a here are ways and concepts and techniques you can use to fight strongly, fight well, keep yourself safe, wound the other person. But if he's able to defend, it doesn't mean I'm doing things wrong. It just means he's as skilled a defender as I am, and we get to keep fighting. So as you're going through these things, there's definitely that like, okay, how much should work, how much shouldn't work, and there's definitely that gray area of what needs to be happening to keep fighting, keep myself safe, and keep working. So again, he cuts, I drive in. Like I've definitely got nice thrust pressure, nice action there.
I feel it.
Really wrapping that around a little bit, but he could push out, right? And it really depends, and that's kind of the very of the fight. However, I'm safe the entire time. At worst, he backs away unscathed. If I go back to leaping out, so as he cuts, right, I don't have any presence. I'm already offline. He's displacing things, and that's assuming again he's actually tracking and moving. Because if he goes back to that dummy Pell partner, where he just then cuts to the space I used to be and I move at the speed of light, it's a vastly different experience. So you can see real quick, if he cuts and doesn't track, right, this kind of becomes like, oh yeah, this is amazing. I've got him dead to rights. There's no way he can hit me. But you, at least I hope, you're never going to fight someone who fights like that. You want a good, engaging fight. You want to be able to learn your skill and practice your art. You don't want somebody who's just like, yep, well, you got me. Go ahead. Because that's just not a fun fight. So the other thing about this is that if you don't want to thrust them, and that definitely gets into a lot more of the laws of the time, rules of the times, and again, that's way out of my scope, my kind of knowledge. But let's look at that, right? So now as I come in with the clash, if I don't want to make that thrust, I can make that false edge cut happen just as easily. So again, he comes in, right? And now I'm really focusing on bringing that cut down, trying to wound either the scalp, the shoulder, kind of working from there. So, all right. Any other thoughts? Anything you should add?
No, good.
All right. So some things to note, things to mention. As soon as swords flash together, obviously that's saying like don't sit in the bind. As soon as you make contact, as soon as you feel their sword, move through it. The indes also ties in that same idea. So indes in the moment as it's happening, make your secondary action. Don't wait to bring him down to the ground and then try to fight, but instead, as soon as something is happening, working from there. All right. So again, from the gloss, we've got two more crimp plays. We'll go through those and call it. So don't strike crimp short. With this, observe Dirk Wechsel. So super confusing. We have no idea what Dirk Wechsel is, so we'll have to invent it right now, and we'll talk
Changing
about that
through.
later. Yeah, so Dirk Wechsel is a change through, but so far in the manuscript, we have no input. So do a crazy thing. So this is a break against the guard of Ox. Do it as follows. When you go to the opponent in the Zufecten, well, he stands in the guard and holds his sword on his left side in front of his head. So you're in left Ox. And no, yeah, perfect. In front of your head. Throw your sword at your right shoulder and pretend to bind at his sword with the krumpau. So we're pretending to bind. We're not actually going to bind. We're doing that same strike we just practiced, right? I wanted to think I'm cutting through at him. I'm going to strike towards his head. I really want him to fear not dealing with my attack. Strike short, and with this, change through below and shoot the point long to the opening on the other side so that he has to displace. Right? Again, he's not expecting to even strike with this, even though we've done a feign or a failure, if you will, and making him bite, and we thrust through, he's expecting them to be able to counter this, right? This is not about wounding from the opening. This is about being able to control the fight and set up good things for yourself for later. So thus you will come to striking and other work with the sword, right? So this is about striking short. A direct vexel is a change through. You're changing sides of the blade. Real brief, if I show it, change through. At its core, I want to go below his sword and come back up. Whether you do it like that, which is very fencing. I'm a fan of this way. Either way, the point of the matter is your sword comes low, it comes back high, and ideally you thrust in violently as you come through. So a few things to unpack of striking short. So he's up in Ox. So quick review. Um, it didn't say footwork, I don't believe. So now we kind of have dealer's choice on footwork. So we'll play with the one we did before, where you, or crossing step, and kind of see what plays out and what we like better. So from the previous version, I'm going to leap to my right, keep my foot pointed forward. Right. So we start here. But if I'm going to strike short, I'm thinking about pulling my hands in, literally shortening my strike, whether I collapse to my ribs. This lets me change through nicely, because I want to get my point underneath the blade, and then I'm going to stab in. Right? And working from there. I did cheat. I did take an extra step I probably didn't have in real life. So playing with that again. So stepping wide to the right, come through, coming through. So immediately you're kind of seeing like I'm really close to walking into a sword point. I'm not super excited with that as that happens. But again, that could be a factor of my partner knowing the drill, right? If I throw this here, right, I just took his hands. So he needs to make sure that you're actually, right, the sword is coming at your hands. And if you don't move, I'm just going to break your fingers. So, right, so now I've got more of a pair I'm looking for. So now I can kind of push through, getting my blade up underneath things, really keeping myself safe and controlled. Other option is I always like stepping across with my cuts. So now, as I throw this krump, right, I'm really driving this down and through. And if he doesn't move, I'm probably just going to crash through this and make him do something else. So if he's expecting that kind of cut, now as I change through, I can very easily drive that thrust into the other side. So either option seems to work fairly nicely. You can really set up with that leap. You can really start striking here to this, right, where I'm able to just get under his sword and then push it up away as I move. If I'm more aggressive, more forward pressing with this as I cut, right, as I change out, I'm able to come through, come out. Make sure you're trying to deflect the bind and not just let it crash on your sword, because that's just going to get you, if I follow through, stabbed. So from here, as I cut, yeah, more. That's better, right? So, so you can see he didn't move a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
He just picked up enough for me to drop, shorten my cut, change through, and now I can just stab this straight through. Other things to keep in mind while you're doing this: don't stand taller than your sword, right? Make sure when you're making this thrust, you're low and your sword is extended, because that is what's deflecting his blade if he doesn't react and move against it. So, should be the last one. Don't start short. All right. Croom to him who bewilders you. The noble war will puzzle him so that bewildering. The noble war will puzzle him so that he will truly not know where to be without danger. All right. So when you want to execute the croup, you shall always present an opening with it.
Hmm.
Right. So they're saying always give your opponent something to attack, something to bite into. While you strike, hear this. While you strike the croup from your right side, or while you bind at his sword, you give an opening on the left side. If he is smart and wants to strike from the sword to the opening and wants to trouble you skillfully, then stay with your sword at his and follow after his strike while staying in touch. So let's start with that half. That's a lot to kind
Mm-hmm.
of unpack and play with. So we're saying that if he cuts, if I make my opening,
Mm-hmm.
and he cuts, and I strike, that as I make the strike, I'm presenting an opening over here. So if he wants to kind of let this fall, winding around, I'd even go under the sword, right? More immediate,
Oh, you
right?
mean?
Yeah, because that's way scarier for me to deal with
Mm-hmm.
than reacting against it. So again, he crimp, right? So I need to stay on it, stay in that touch, maintain that contact. Yeah, because even if I could try to stab him, but I just gave him equal rights to stab me, or he can be super smart and try to wind against it and counter stab. That seems to be a solid first half. Um, Stay in it. So wind the point index towards his face and continue to work with the war towards his openings. Thus he will indeed not know in which places to defend himself from your strikes or thrusts. So again, a subtle reminder that we should be looking for all the three wounders, well, at least two of the three, as you're working on this. So we cut, I crimp, right? And all of a sudden, as he winds up, if I wind up against him as he pushes this away, right, I can just keep moving through. So
Stop
he
it.
will literally not know where he is safe against everything I can lay against him. So I'll read that one again, top to bottom, just so we're all on the same page. So when you want to execute the Krumpau, you shall always present an opening with it. So hear this: while you strike the Krumpau from your right side, or while you bind at his sword, you give an opening on the left. So the other interesting thing about this could be just from the normal bind, right? He's emphasizing, like, yes, this is really highlighted in the Krumpau. It's a great place to see and understand how this is applying, but just a normal sword bind, right? So if we are in a normal neutral bind here, my left side is opening, right? So even if he tries to wind here, I'm gonna, right? I can roll to a croom to keep myself safe, and then wind up, and then I can start working these motions, these controls, to try to make sure he stays away from me. So while you strike the croom from your right side, or while you bind down his sword, give an opening on the left. If he is smart and wants to strike from the sword to the opening, and wants to trouble you skillfully, then stay with his sword with your sword at his, and follow after his strike while staying in touch. Wind the point index towards his face and continue to work with the war towards his openings. Thus he will not know in which place to defend himself from your strikes or thrusts.
When you said strike, that's why I thought he meant come around.
Yeah.
I didn't follow, but
I mean,
it was
we can try
everything.
that as well.
Everything
Like it's the
works.
same thing, right? So as he cuts, if you try to come around, right, same thing. I think if I was better, or you made a slightly smaller cut and didn't like pull all the way
Mm-hmm.
around. So here, you try, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right, I can just stay on that sword and work the thrusts and work my points. So even if we go back to the original cut from the bind, if you try to disengage and cut to over here, right, I can stay on that sword. I should be trying to follow it with my blade. I should know which way it's left from the bind and be able to follow and chase from there. So we have just dug through all the crew pow in the Jude Lew spec book tonight. Definitely, I'm sure there's a bunch of questions, concerns, confusion because we kind of did it ham-fisted. I said we're doing this blind read along. We maybe looked at the book 10 minutes before we started tonight, but I think that makes it fun. I think it makes it interesting. It's definitely a very honest look at kind of what this study should be. So if there's questions, comments, feedback, comment below, YouTube, Facebook, any of the good stuff. Otherwise, everyone have a great night and stay safe. And we'll see you guys Friday for some more cloak. Thanks.